Welcome to the Texas School Safety Center's Learning Lab podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Peterson. I work at the Texas School Safety Center in Training and Education, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm the center's mental health subject matter expert. The Texas School Safety Center serves as a clearinghouse for the dissemination of safety and security information through research, training, and technical assistance for K-12 schools and junior colleges throughout the state of Texas. Our goal for this podcast is to have thought-provoking conversations about mental health challenges facing Texas schools and explore how educators and mental health professionals are addressing these challenges. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the impacts of bullying on mental health and how schools can determine when bullying is taking place. I did want to note that there's a trigger warning for today's episode because we will be discussing topics related to bullying and mental health up to and including suicide. So if you have little ears around, I just wanted to give you that trigger warning. On today's episode, we're going to be covering what bullying is and isn't because that's the first step in providing resources and support. We'll talk about the impacts of bullying on mental health and then how a school can determine if it's bullying taking place. I'm thrilled to say that we have an incredibly special guest in our studio today for our very first episode. We have Maurine Molak, the co-founder, along with her husband, Matt, and sons Cliff and Chris of David's Legacy Foundation. The Molak family created the David's Legacy Foundation after the death of their beloved son and brother, David, who died by suicide after being relentlessly cyberbullied. The mission of David's Legacy Foundation is to eliminate cyber and other forms of bullying of children and teens through education, legislation, and legal action. I'm so grateful to have you here today, Maurine.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I want to thank the Texas School Safety Center for including me, especially in this first podcast. It's exciting to be here. I just appreciate the work that you guys do regarding mental health and school safety. So thank you so much.
It's our pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start with a better understanding of what bullying is because I'm hearing from school administrators that it's one of the biggest challenges that they're facing in their schools. Bullying not only affects the person itself, it affects people who witness it, it affects parents, and it affects school safety and climate. And it's important to know the distinctions between conflict, disagreements, somebody being mean or rude, because bullying is something that's prevalent. What are the markers for bullying or cyberbullying, and how is it different from a child being mean or rude or having a conflict with other students?
Well, that's really important. I think we're all kind of used to the general definition of bullying, which is repeated, unwanted, aggressive behavior with the goal to have control over another person or intent to harm. And so that's just sort of the generally accepted definition of it. But it's really important for us to look at these individual situations to determine, whether it meets that level of a bullying. And so, I have to give a lot of examples to parents when they reach out to us for help. So, for instance, like maybe rude behavior might be maybe a behavior from a child who's not really sure of like their personal space. Like, for example, maybe the teacher's asking for all of the tests to come up to the front of her desk, and you've got a child who's so excited to turn in their test, and they run up and they kick accidentally another child, and they turn around and they look and they know they've done it, but they don't even say anything about it, and then they run up and they hand in their test score. Okay, so that's rude behavior. There was no intent to harm. There was just this rude behavior of not really understanding what their personal space was. Then you've got mean behavior, right? So yes, maybe you've got a child who is having a really bad day and they had a bad morning with their parents and they are lashing out at somebody else in their classroom, and they may say something like, and we hear this often, the dress that you're wearing is ugly. Where did you buy it? At a thrift store. That's going to be really hurtful to a child. Now, that child that said that behavior can be redirected by a teacher and talked about empathy and trying to understand where that child is coming from. And so that would be like mean behavior. It only happens once. Once has been redirected. It doesn't happen again. So that's basically a definition for mean behavior. And then, of course, bullying, like, I said before, it's like going to be repeated with intent to harm. Conflict is another thing that a lot of parents will say that's bullying, and it's not. I mean, conflict, you're on even ground, right? There's no power imbalance there. It's a disagreement where somebody can come in and mediate that. That's what's really important and distinguishes between conflict and bullying. Counselors are great at mediating conflict. School counselors are great at that. But when it rises to the level of bullying, I've had very few school counselors have said to me that can actually be mediated because there is that desire to have that control and power over another student with intent to harm. And of course, there's many other behaviors that sometimes intertwine with these bullying situations. You've got assault. You have sextortion when you're talking about cyberbullying situations, dating violence, and sometimes a specific incident can meet the legal definition of multiple things. And so it's important when we're looking at these that we're looking at them from a definitional and also being able to investigate it and really understand what's going on.
Yeah, so with conflict and with rude behavior and mean behavior, it is important, right, that as schools and parents that we teach our kids consequences for our actions. And it's not that we go ahead and say, well, it's just rude or it's just mean, it's not bullying, so therefore there's nothing that we can do. They still need to learn how to interact with each other. We're not born knowing how to interact with each other. And there is more conflict or potentially rude behavior or mean behavior, but that's something that we can come in and we can teach kids. It's not appropriate to do this, or if we accidentally hit somebody, it's important that we say we're sorry, and we learn from those types of things. With the pandemic and coming back into schools and coming back into the community, there has been a little bit more conflict with each other, and not we're not able to navigate that as easily. I know in my own work environment, coming back into the office and being around other people, the frustration sometimes has gone up in situations. And so just learning how to mediate and interact with other people. So as a result of the pandemic, have you noticed that there's been an increase with bullying and cyberbullying?
Yes, we have. I think when the kids were out of school, they lacked that structure and accountability, and we didn't have the opportunities to address situations when they were occurring in our classrooms. So we saw a lot of bad behavior in the world in general, right? I mean, people were much less tolerant of one another. They were of different beliefs. They were vitriolic on social media. They just angry coming out of the pandemic. And we saw that was trickling down into our children were learning that, right? They were seeing it happen. And so they were acting on it. So yes, we did see quite a bit of that. And then also with social media, we saw, like, for instance, some TikTok challenges that were taking off in the schools. And, one example would be what we've experienced quite a bit recently is kids are filming other children using the toilets in the restrooms. Wow. And often, I would say probably more than 70% of the parents that reached out to us in this particular incident, those children were disabled. And they could not advocate for themselves. And those videos of those students or pictures were posted on social media. And, kids would comment on it, and the parents would end up finding out. And it just created a really bad situation for that child. So you've got multiple things going on there, right? You could have suspected bullying that's happening from that cyberbullying from the posts, but then you've also got this photography in a place where a child is, expected to have privacy. And so you've got multiple things going on in that situation. But a lot of fighting in our schools we saw, which kind of translates to what we're seeing out there in the real world. At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the things that we experienced quite a bit was it happened after the terrible tragic death of George Floyd. And we saw a lot of racial cyberbullying because, the kids were home and they were using technology. And, one situation that came up, and this mother has given me permission to talk about what had happened. Her daughter, she's a high schooler, and there were some posts that were created on social media. They took her picture and superimposed it in a coffin. And they also superimposed her picture being lynched and on a cross. And they said things like gorilla pack watch, filthy monkey burning. Why do y'all have to be black man? Y'all are so filthy. And it was just tragic. And this mother that was reaching out to us for support was just devastated that her daughter would be the target of such horrible racial cyberbullying. And this is, one of the most horrible, incidents that I have seen in the last few years. But it's not an isolated incident. We saw many of these types of situations. So the pandemic definitely exacerbated it.
And you're talking about things that there are some observable markers of bullying, and it's really obvious that it's in front of us and we can see it happening. But quite often it's subtle and it's behind the scenes. And our own belief systems can often prevent us from seeing what's right in front of us. And parents may not even know what's going on with their child right now. Their child may be being bullied currently, or staff may not be recognizing that what's in front of them that's taking place right now is bullying. And so why is it important that we all kind of recognize when it's something that is taking place?
Well, I think times have changed, and I think research is coming out. We're learning a whole lot more about the long-term consequences of bullying and the importance of us addressing it early on so that there aren't long-term consequences. We often hear about ACEs, the number of ACEs that a child has growing up, the higher their chances of having long-term physical and mental impairments later on in life. Their success as an adult can be dependent on how many ACEs that they had growing up. So it is important that we recognize those behaviors, and they do go kind of fly under the radar sometimes, especially with racial bullying and relational bullying. Maybe like, innuendos, things that are said may not necessarily be, somebody might not really understand what that person is saying. A lot of times our kids talk in code language, especially on social media, so they might not understand it. But relational bullying, we're seeing quite a bit, and that definitely can go under the radar. Teachers don't necessarily see that, and kids don't necessarily report it. They feel ashamed, they feel unloved, unliked. They become disconnected. And I completely understand what that's like because my son David felt very disconnected from his school community, and that was devastating to him. So we just need to make sure that we're recognizing those signs and we're looking for it in places that it may not be obvious.
Yeah, so for those who may not know, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And it's a fantastic way to understand how these events in our childhood really can impact us later on in life, like you were saying. And actually, there's some research that shows people may even die early or have long-term medical issues as a result of some of these early adverse childhood experiences.
Right. Yeah. Heart disease is one. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So you were talking about how it can impact mental health long term, and that's something that I think it's really important that we understand our own biases as adults. That I know I've had conversations with my family members, some of my extended family members, where they're like, "Oh gosh, all this talk about bullying. It's just a rite of passage. We all experience this growing up. This isn't something like we're making everything bullying when it's not. And if we don't check those biases, if we're not aware of those biases, it can prohibit us from actually seeing what's taking place in front of us." And I think that's why it's important we talk about the impact of mental health and the long-term impact of mental health. And it's not just the target that can be affected. I did want to cover really quickly some of the long-term psychological effects. So it's not just a sense of disconnection and isolation. It's also low self-esteem. It can be depression, anxiety, self-harm behavior, substance use as a way to cope with some of the things that you're experiencing in life. It can also lead to acute stress disorder or even post-traumatic stress disorder. It can be really long-term that these things are impacting somebody, and it's impacting their sense of self, their own identity, that I am this person that is not worthy, that I am the one that causes problems. It's not other people's problems, it's mine. And that can also lead to anger and aggression and acting out. That could lead to somebody even saying, and we have seen this a lot, I'm sure you've seen this a lot too, that they were a target of bullying and they don't want to experience that anymore, so they actually become the aggressor and bully somebody else.
Right. Well, and I think it's important too that we understand that a child who's exhibiting bullying behavior, what those consequences might look like. I was listening to a judge the other night who was talking about children in his court system. And he said that when there's bullying, when he's digging into why a child is acting the way that they are, he's found that child has exhibited bullying behavior and that leads to fighting. It leads to domestic assault. It can lead to, long-term violence, and that child can end up in the prison system. And so it's so important that we're understanding, and I think we're getting better about it. And that's what is exciting for us at David's Legacy Foundation, is to know that research is coming out. People are starting to understand it better. It's no longer considered a rite of passage. Yes, there are still some people out there that believe, that the world is tough and kids just need to, pull up their bootstraps and just get through it. But I think we're learning more about those consequences, and we're taking it more seriously in the way that it needs to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. So we were talking about how quite often we can see that this is taking place, or we understand that this is taking place, and it impacts students, but it also can impact people who are witnessing it. So bystanders and even, parents and people, outside of just the target of the bullying. So I wanted to talk really quickly about the bystander effect, because that's something that I think we don't talk about enough. So we see things on the news, or we hear about in schools, like a fight taking place or something happening, and everyone just brings out their phone and videotapes it, and nobody tells anybody, and they just post it online, and they're somewhat desensitized to it, and nobody tells anybody, nobody reaches out for help, nobody intervenes. And so the bystander effect is when there's more than one person essentially watching something taking place, and they're less likely actually to do something about it. So the more people are observing something taking place, the less likely they are to tell somebody and intervene. And so I think it's really important that we empower and teach our young people how to intervene and how to speak up and how to be an upstander, whether that's direct intervention or indirect intervention. So directly, what are some of the ways that somebody could directly intervene if they're witnessing bullying or something taking place?
Yeah, if a student is witnessing bullying behavior, they can, if they feel confident enough in the situation, they're safe in the situation, they can stand up and say, hey, that's not how we act. That's not, the way of our school. We don't do that, or that behavior needs to stop. They can also, go to the aid of the person that's the target and let them know that what happened to them is not okay, and that they're willing to help them and help them report it if they need that. That's what we hear from kids. It's like the number one thing that can help them in a situation of bullying is just knowing that they've got an ally in that situation. And like you're saying, the bystander effect, this diffusion of responsibility. I think from all of the kids that we talk to, one of the things that I hear from them is they don't report because they're not really sure what it is, right? So if you think about it, maybe you've got, let's take cyberbullying, for example. And, you've got all these people involved in this conversation, and you've got somebody that's coming in 5 minutes into the post, right? They hadn't really seen what had happened prior to that. They don't really know what's going on, but they know what's going on in that moment is not good. And so, and I'll tell kids, you know what? It's really not your responsibility to determine whether or not it's cyberbullying or not. It's really just your responsibility to report it to someone who can determine what it is and take action on it. A lot of kids will say, well, it just seems like it's just drama, and we'll say, well, it may be, but because you're not sitting with that person who may be on the other end of that drama, you don't really know what their response is to it. You don't know how they're internalizing it, and you don't know what else has been happening to that child. So if you have a child who may be experiencing some other mental health, situations, depression, and you throw in cyberbullying or physical bullying, that's going to exacerbate a situation for that child. And so we don't really know everybody's story. So it's just really our responsibility as good humans is just to report it. There's definitely a difference between reporting and tattling, and that's certainly something that we talk to kids about. Tattling is getting somebody in trouble. Reporting is getting somebody the help that they may need in a situation. Often I'll hear from kids the reason why they don't report is because nothing ever changes. They don't have complete confidence in the adults to have them make change, to have them do anything about it. So as adults, we all play a role in that, whether it's a parent, whether it's an adult advocate, or whether it's a school administrator. We have to walk the talk. If we say we're not going to stand for it and that's not who we are, then we have to follow through. We need to make sure that our kids that they don't become cynical. Because then that's when terrible things happen, both, mental health as well as in our schools. We need kids to know that we've got their backs. We say we do. We need to prove it to them. So it may be a situation where they may not know everything. If it comes out and a school has to address an issue, they may not be able to tell that student everything. But they can tell them enough information for them to say, you know what, I reported this and something did happen. Change did occur. So that's really important.
Yeah. So those of you who are listening may not know this, but Maurine and I are actually really good friends in real life, and we've had a lot of these conversations over the years. David's Legacy Foundation, you guys created David's Law, and you expanded some protection for students, for example, for cyberbullying, and then additional things. But one of the things I'd like to talk about really quick, because it made me think of what you were talking about, one of the reasons that people don't tell anyone is they either don't understand what's going on because they haven't seen the whole picture. It also could be fear of retaliation. And so you guys created, with the legislators, anonymous reporting. And so that's a way for somebody who may be fearful of the consequences and they want to be able to report what's going on. Students in every school district here in Texas, right, they have a way to anonymously report. And so could you just talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, so that was really important to us when we first started working on the legislation. We talked to a bunch of different stakeholders, and one of the things that we heard from students was their fear of retaliation or their fear of someone seeing them walk into the assistant principal's office. So being able to provide a way for them to anonymously report was really important for us, as well as for parents and for other teachers to be able to anonymously report. And yes, it started off small where in 2017, schools just had to have an anonymous reporting tool for students to report bullying and cyberbullying. But a lot of schools opened that up to other members of their community to be able to report not just bullying and cyberbullying, but any incident of school safety. Well, of course, later in subsequent sessions, that opened up to all schools now provide that. And we're not really dictating on what that anonymous reporting tool has to be. Schools have flexibility on what that looks like, but there are great tools out there, and it's really important for our students to learn how to be able to report anonymously or in person, to advocate for themselves and to advocate for others.
Yeah, because it does impact the overall feel in school. It impacts school climate. If students feel like nothing is going to be done, I'm just not going to report anyway. So we have to empower. We're telling kids, you need to report this. We're telling staff, you need to do something about it. And one of the things that you guys created as well in conjunction with the Texas School Safety Center is the bullying checklist for schools. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So the bullying checklist is a great tool for parents, for schools to use. It just walks them through the legal definition in Texas, which is specific. It's a little different than the general definition that we talked about a few minutes ago. It really focuses on the impact of the victim and how it affects that person and their ability to learn, their ability to go to school. Does it infringe on their rights when we're talking about in-school bullying? And then it addresses cyberbullying separately because we wanted to make sure that schools had the authority to be able to investigate and take action on cyberbullying incidents that affected a child's ability to be able to go to school. So we had to balance First Amendment issues with a school's authority to be able to take action to something that was said outside of school hours, maybe at night, right? That's something we know about cyberbullying is it can happen 24/7. The student can't ever get away from it. It has this huge reach where hundreds and thousands of kids can see it and experience it and like it and share it, and it never goes away. So it was really important for us to be able to give that authority to schools, and they were asking for it. Like I said, when we crafted David's Law in 2017, we engaged a lot of stakeholders. We want, in the process to make sure that what we were advocating for, tools, creating a framework for us all to be able to address these incidents that weren't there when I was going through what I was going through with David.
Thank you for all that you've done with that, by the way. And I love this checklist. We've updated it through the years to make sure that it is the most up-to-date. And one of the things that was recently added were examples, because the law is not always perfectly clear, and it can be subjective at times. And so one of the things that was included was the first part of the checklist, is it one significant act or a pattern of acts? Well, like you were talking about, what does significant mean? Is it significant to me as the target of the bullying, or subjective to me significant to me as the administrator. Pattern of acts, over what duration, what constitutes a pattern. And so we went into a little bit of the depth of the law to show a range of behaviors. And this is a tool that can be used by anyone. Parents can use it. School administrators can use it. One of the administrators I talked to, he was a principal in a middle school, I believe. And what he did, I thought this was really smart. He actually printed it out because he was having a lot of situations that were being labeled as bullying by the students themselves that he didn't necessarily believe actually met the legal criteria for bullying. Not being invited to a birthday party, things like that. So he printed it out and he put it on his wall in his office. And so whenever a student came in to talk about that, he'd go through the checklist with the student. And what I loved about this is it put in that student's mind that he's taking it seriously, that he's going through each one of those checklists with that student. And I think that works a lot to benefit school climate as well, that it is something that every allegation is going to be taken seriously. That being said, it's really important that we're not making these decisions in isolation. And I know that's something that you and I have talked about quite a bit, that schools are running into a problem with the consequences of that because they have one person just determining they're listening to a student and whether they're looking through the checklist or not. Side note, I do want to say that the checklist is really helpful for preventing our bias because we can look at the legal definition. If we're not looking at the legal definition, we're likely to sweep things under the rug and have our bias interfere with that.
Right.
But separately, it's really important that I, as a vice principal or assistant principal, or a principal, that I'm not sitting there looking at it saying, yeah, I think this meets criteria or doesn't, that I bring in other people because, again, with our own viewpoints, maybe we're missing something. Maybe I bring in a counselor, maybe I bring in law enforcement, and all of us together can look at the situation and we can determine together whether this meets, criteria. Could you talk about some of the situations that you've run into and some of the consequences of somebody making that decision in isolation?
Sure. So first of all, I want to say something, the spirit behind that adding a single significant act. That was really important to us, really because of the nature of cyberbullying. Mm-hmm. We wanted schools to be able to have the authority when it was one post or one video that got spread on multiple social media channels, that got commented and liked on many different times, to be able to, depending on how significant that was. And that is basically talking to the target of it. Mm-hmm. It's like how is that affecting them? To be able to take action on what could be a single significant act. So that's why we added that piece in there. But I think the threat assessment teams mm-hmm. from SB 11, right, mm-hmm. 2019, which opened up the door. So bullying and cyberbullying in statute is considered a threat, mm-hmm. can be considered a threat. And so being able to look at it with that threat assessment team is really important because you don't necessarily want the same person who's receiving the report to be doing the investigation and coming up with any consequences and visiting with the parents over the situation. Not in all cases. In some cases, of course, that might be how it needs to be handled. But if you're not sure, mm-hmm. being able to bring in those other folks in these situations, like, for instance, the example that I just gave you about the terrible racial mm-hmm. cyberbullying that occurred, that had been looked at just by one administrator. And when it first started happening, nothing was done. And so had maybe that administrator brought in other people that could help them, right, diffuse some of the responsibility, mm-hmm. because we know our administrators have so much going on mm-hmm. right now, that it could be that they could need some help. They need another set of eyes on it, another viewpoint on it, to be able to address it early on. Maybe it wouldn't have gotten to the level that it got had that first incident been addressed more thoroughly in the school. So that's an important thing, to consider in those contexts. One of the other things that we've seen often is like when there was an incident recently where there were a football team who had taken a child and they had done a swirly, stuck the kid's head in a toilet, flushed the toilet, had been videoed, put out on social media. So not only do you have the physical bullying that occurred, but then you've got it out on social media. You've got a child who is devastated, humiliated in front of the football team, as well as, so there could be multiple things that are going on in this situation. And just the importance of being able to bring in the coaches, the school counselor, the wellness counselor, social worker. So not only do we have to take care of that child who was the target of all of this, but we need to do some empathy training, as well as some lesson training, some character building, these are the consequences, of what this behavior can do, and whether what their intent was. That's what they have to determine, when they're doing the investigation. So it's just really important that we're looking at it from multiple lenses and bringing in those people that may have a different experience and expertise to address. And then, of course, the bottom line is the mental health. What we're talking about today is the mental health of that child who is the target of that. Are we able to provide the help that child needs to be able to get through this terrible incident that occurred on campus? And when I talk to kids about these situations, it's very different. You're talking to a child and you're talking to parents. Their viewpoint is very different in these situations. The kid just wants it to stop. They just want to go on about their day. They really don't want it to be made a big deal.
Right.
They just want it to go away and stop, so they can go about their life and be happy. We need our kids to be happy and feel safe at school. Now, the parents, on the other hand, they may want justice. I would say 95% of the time, they're obviously, and rightfully so, thinking about their child and wanting justice in a situation like that. And we do try to navigate through that very, respectfully with parents. I mean, I understand that as a parent who's gone through it, but also know that you can get so much more accomplished in your school if you're working peaceably with your administrators and if there's communication. I cannot stress that enough. That is the number one thing that I hear that could help parents navigate through these situations when they're talking to administrators is communication. And if there's ever a time to over-communicate, it's in one of these situations, because that transference of trauma from the child to the parent is happening. They are often missing work. They meaning parents? Yes, parents are having to miss work because they're advocating for their child up at the school. They're not sleeping well. They have a lot of, guilt themselves. They're asking questions like, what's wrong with my child? What did I do wrong as a parent? And so there's all these emotions, and they themselves are often experiencing a mental health crisis themselves. So I think about it, and when I talk to educators, I tell them it's like what we hear on the airplane, right? You want to put that oxygen mask on the parent first so that parent can then put the oxygen mask on their child. How can we help that parent navigate through it? How can we communicate? How can we explain? Just like the assistant principal that you were just talking about is walking through the checklist with the student. It's walking through that checklist with the parent, having a dialogue with them on, yes, it meets the definition of bullying, or no, it doesn't. But it's still mistreatment. And we're still going to take action on it. And this is what we're going to do in order to make sure that your child is safe and wants to come to school. And here's how we're going to help you navigate through this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that we recognize that schools are in a state of crisis right now. But the act of, I mean, I get phone calls, I know you do as well, from parents and sometimes from staff. But specifically, like, I'll talk about the parents. They are frustrated because they just want to talk to somebody. They just want to understand, because to them it meets the legal criteria of bullying. They don't know why the school isn't taking action, and the school may be taking action, but it goes so far, and it can prohibit things from escalating in the future, to just have a quick conversation with a parent, whether that's over phone or in person, and just hearing them out and just listening to them. And maybe it is providing resources and support for the parent, resources and support for the student, whether or not it meets the criteria for bullying. Like you said, I think that's really important, that even if it doesn't meet the criteria for bullying, obviously they need some support or scaffolding or something for that child, and potentially for the other children that are potentially engaging in behaviors that are not, at minimum, are not kind.
Right.
And intervening early so that it doesn't escalate over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was part of David's Law, was that there would be mental health resources, not necessarily provided, but given to a parent on where they could go for help. And here's something that I've really learned over the past several years, is that so parents reach out to schools because they think they are the experts, right? They're going to them for help in these situations. When there's communication, that parent is building trust with those individuals at the school level. When we break that trust, the resources that are available to that student, the parent may not engage in those. They may not appreciate those. Therefore, that student may not get the support that they need. So if we can work with parents, build that trust with them in these situations, and explain to them, that there may not necessarily have to be some sort of punitive consequence, right? I mean, the bottom line is, what is the goal here, right? That these kids can live on the same campus and not necessarily have to be friends, right? But treat each other with the dignity, respect, and regard that we all as human beings deserve to be treated. And to get the parent to understand that can be difficult, and I get that, and we try to work with parents to understand that. That's our message, working with peace, in peace, and trying to get these kids to be able to go to school together and to be able to get through it. So it's really important from the mental health aspect of it. If a student needs mental health support, counseling, therapy, if there's all the mental health that came out in 2019, right? So you've got T-Chat and all of these other mental health resources that are available to students now, but with parent permission, right?
Right.
So in order for that parent to say, you have my permission to do this, they have to trust. And so building that trust in these situations is really important.
Absolutely. And I did want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned the threat assessment teams. And so for those who may not know, it's also known as the Safe and Supportive School Program Team. So every public school must be served by a Safe and Supportive School Program Team, and they are responsible for collecting and analyzing potentially harmful, threatening, or violent behavior, which includes cyberbullying and bullying, to assess that there's potentially a threat or a risk, and then they can determine appropriate interventions. So each K-12 school is served by a Safe and Supportive School Program Team, a threat assessment team. Their whole job is to look at these situations and determine whether there's something going on, if there is a threat that's involved. And so they can utilize the checklist for that as well. And I think a piece to this is teaching our students and our staff that there are these teams in these schools, and they're made up of the different areas of expertise that you mentioned earlier. There's 9 areas of expertise that can be filled by, multiple people. It's not necessarily 9 people. It might be 8 because a person has more than one expertise and background. But it's expertise in substance use, in mental health, in law enforcement, in administration, in special education. There's this wide variety of expertise looking at a situation and intervening. And all of these teams are trained through the Texas School Safety Center or the local Education Service Center. So there is training involved, and it is school staff that are looking at this. But I did want to say that it is important that students know where to report this, whether it's through anonymous reporting, if it's a school administrator or law enforcement on campus or a school counselor, that they can kind of get the ball rolling to look at, does this meet the legal criteria for bullying? And then do we need to go ahead and implement a threat assessment to determine whether this person is posing a real threat on our campus? Because it could be, we think about a threat being something like a school shooter, but it also can be bullying and cyberbullying.
Right.
And that can actually really impact school climate and the health and safety of students in school.
Right. And the threat also could be to self, right? So you've got a child who is the target of cyberbullying or bullying. What is that level of threat of that child, harming themselves in that situation? So it needs to be looked at both from the perpetrators and as well as the victim.
Absolutely. And I think that that's another thing, talking about mental health and students just wanting the bullying to end. I think that what we quite often forget as adults is what it's like to be a kid. And we sometimes minimize their experience. And we talk about, I'll use the analogy of like puppy love. It's not real love. It's just puppy love. Like once you grow up, you'll understand this is not what it is. And we minimize and excuse behavior. We say, yeah, you were bullied. Like this person threw you down the stairs, or they just put something on social media. Just turn off your phone. It's fine. Like you're not going to know these people after you leave high school. Like nobody cares about these people. And I hear parents saying that to kids or adults, kind of minimizing their experience. But a child's brain development and their experience, kids are very egocentric. The world does revolve around them. Yeah. And it's hard for them to see and to be able to understand that long-term, this isn't going to be something that necessarily impacts them long-term. But from their perspective in that situation, it is. It is permanent. It is not getting better. It is something that they're going to have to deal with forever. And I think it's really important that we understand and remember that and not just minimize. It's not a big deal. It's fine. We're going to move on. Like, let's just move on.
Right. I think a couple of points to bring up would be, yes, a lot of us parents didn't grow up with these devices, and the world has changed. Generations change, and our kids, the device is their lifeline. For any parent who's tried to take a phone away from their child, I mean, I've had parents tell me it's like cutting off their arm.
Yeah. Like
they'd rather give up their arm than me take their phone away from them. We don't understand that fully, unless we grew up with it, right? But that doesn't mean that we just completely ignore that and dismiss it, right? We need to understand it, and we need to appreciate that, okay, this is where our kids are today, and how do we navigate through that? So that's one point. And the other point, too, that I wanted to bring up is when we're talking about, dismissing bullying situations and just saying, oh, it's just going to go away, or just, forget about it. In the workplace, you can't walk down the hall and shove a coworker into the wall, right? I mean, you just can't do that as an adult in the workplace. So why would we think that that's okay to do in a school? So are we sending mixed messages to people or to our kids, about what's acceptable in school, but yet in the real world, in the adult working world, that would never fly. So it's just important in the way that we address things and we're looking at things. And also, we're finding out people are losing their jobs because of the things that they're posting on social media. Mm-hmm. So why would we just say to a kid, just ignore it, it's just going to go away? Well, there are long-term consequences. Mm-hmm. For things that you post online. We've all heard of cancel culture, mm-hmm. And all of that. And there are some real world consequences that have devastating effects to families for things that are posted online.
Absolutely. And one of the best things that we can be proactive about, and that is so important, is for our students to have somebody that they can feel close to and that they can open up with and they can talk with. So an ally of sorts. It's really important that as school staff, one of the things that you could do is during a professional learning PLC period, or if you have teacher in-service day, one of the things you can do is have a list of all of your students and have every staff member put their name or initials next to a student that they have a relationship with, like a close relationship. They know more than just their grades on a test. And see those kids who don't have somebody close to them that's reaching out to them, or they don't know anybody. My sister's a high school English teacher, and one of the things that she does is every week she sends out an encouraging message to her students, and that's through email or through their portal. She just sends something encouraging to them, and she said that it has really opened her eyes that kids have come up to her. She's high school. Kids have come up to her and said that was the only nice thing that they heard that week. Oh, wow. That they start to feel like she actually cares about them, and they open up about what it is that they're experiencing. And it's a conversation starter, but it also lets them know. And she means what she says. Yeah. It's not just done to check it off a list or this is a good thing to do. She's very genuine about it. I love these kids, and I want them to know that I care about them and that somebody loves them, that somebody cares about them. And I think that that's a very important message that our staff are aware of, our parents are aware of, that these kids need to have that relationship, and that's so critical. And if it's not a parent that they feel like they can come and talk to. I'm very close to my little niece and nephew. If they don't feel like they can talk to their mom about something, I want them to know that they can talk to me. If it's not an aunt, is it a grandma? Is it a neighbor? Is it a coach? Is it clergy of some sort? Who are the people that they can go and talk to if something's going on, and that they don't have to feel like they are dealing with this by themselves. Yeah. They're unsure, if they're having a really tough day or they're experiencing bullying, but they don't want it to get worse. I know I was actually bullied by a coach in elementary school, and I talked to my mom, and I said, please don't go to this coach and talk to her about it. You're going to make it worse. And my mom went and talked to the coach, and the next day, have to call your mommy on me, huh? In front of everybody, and it got so much worse. And so having that adult or that person in the community that your child feels connected to can help them navigate, okay, yes, this is what we can do. Here's our options, but you're not having to go through this alone. We have all of these people here.
Yeah. I love that your sister does that. That's so important, because there was a recent study that came out that said that young people are more willing to talk to a school personnel, teacher or administrator, than they are to their parents. So I thought that was really interesting. And I also, just from personal experience, know how hard it is raising teenagers. Mm-hmm. And, we don't always get along really well with our teenagers, especially one that may be going through something when, they're angry. And, when David was going through what he was going through, and I sent him to a therapist, and the therapist described his behavior as prickly. Mm. And how hard that is when you're working and you've got so many other stressors in your life, and you're dealing with a child. You may not have the best relationship at that time with your child. The child knows you love them, but it may be another adult, just like you as an aunt, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, building that relationship with another adult in their life, like who are they going to go to if they need help? If you're having a hard time with your child at that moment, who is it that you can tap in your family or in your close circle of friends, like you said, in your church, or maybe a youth pastor or somebody that can regularly check in with your child and make sure that they're doing okay. That's just really important that our kids always have somebody that they know that they can count on no matter what.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of my mom. When I was in high school growing up, I was very irritable and kind of angry, and I would lash out at times. And it ended up being that I had depression, and so I ended up getting treatment for that. But quite often, I think there are these warning signs in children and adolescents that we sometimes minimize or excuse. And what my mom said was, "You lashed out at me and you were angry at me, but I actually saw it as a sign of you could let go. You didn't have to be on." She said, "If you can't let your guard down with me, who else can you do it?" And so that's one of the things that sometimes I talk to parents about, is to make sure that you're not too reactive, that when a child is lashing out at you, that you're not going, "How dare you talk to me like that? You're not going to talk to me. I'm the best person in your life. How dare you talk to me like that? You could talk to other people, but I'm your parent. You don't do that." And maybe look through that at what is driving that behavior rather than just the behavior itself. And in teenagers and adolescents specifically, sometimes they're expressing their anxiety or their experiences of bullying, or it could be abuse or trauma or grief, through their behaviors. With young people, with like children specifically, it may be somatic symptoms. And the way that I explain that to people is an emotional cause with a physical outcome. So there's something emotionally going on with them, but they're expressing it physically, right? So my tummy hurts, my back hurts, I don't feel good, I don't want to go to school, because they can't articulate that they're being bullied or that something's happening. And for our teenagers, we may look at it as more of the prickly behavior, right? More of the anger, or maybe there's a change in appearance to kind of keep people away. And so with that relationship with other people, not just a parent, with school staff members, with anybody in the community or in their family or extended family, they may be able to kind of push through and see what's going on and then get assistance for that child.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And one of the other things too, kind of a warning sign, is a child stop, being involved in something that they've been involved with. Like, for instance, in my situation, David loved basketball. He played basketball for years. Then all of a sudden didn't want to play. And so,
what did he say why he didn't want to play?
He never really gave a reason. He was blaming it on, his coach or for whatever, and we had, you're always going to have, these maybe relationship issues with coaches or other team players, right? That you can navigate through that. But to want to completely stop something that you have loved and you've invested. I mean, he was on AAU teams. I mean, he went to basketball camps all summer long. And so that was a clear sign to us that something was really wrong. And it's hard to distinguish between, is it a mental health issue, or is it bullying or cyberbullying, and what comes first, right? And it doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that we have to address what's happening with that child and give them the support that they need and get them the outside help. I'll tell parents, look, most parents are not a licensed professional counselor.
Right.
But we can recognize the signs. And for moms, I'll say, mother's intuition. Like, we know when there's something really not right with our kids. And I can remember just like reaching out to so many people saying, something is not right. I need help. Somebody help me. And just that, I'll often describe it as being in a tornado and everything is spinning really, really fast. But I was moving in slow motion.
Wow.
It was, I needed help. And there was not help available to me at that time, and I knew something was wrong, and I was so afraid for him. And so just being able to make sure that we have that help, and that we're all in this together.
Absolutely. And to that effect, I did want to highlight some resources that we have available and things that we've referenced. So we have the bullying checklist for schools that's on the Texas School Safety Center's website and David's Legacy Foundation website. We have it available in color and black and white, and we have it available in Spanish as well. You also mentioned, as far as resources goes, T-Chat and some of the newer things that are available. On our website, we have a Parent's Guide to School Safety. It's a toolkit under the Tools tab, and it highlights school safety legislation written specifically for parents. And it talks about we have bullying and cyberbullying as one of the topics, or one of the chapters. We also have school behavioral threat assessment, but we highlight those resources for parents. We also have another toolkit specifically for schools, for parents as well, but mental health resources. And it's just kind of an overview of some of the things, because it's for all of Texas. If you don't know where else to go, there's some resources for your local, local mental health
authority.
Thank you. Your local mental health authority. I appreciate that. Your local mental health authority, and it has the email, the phone number, and how you can connect with them. We also provide the training. We provide a Before You Text curriculum course for students aged 12 up to learn a little bit more about sexting and bullying prevention. So we have a lot of resources available on our website. We have the school safety legislation, some of the 87th, the newer changes that happened in 2021. We have that available. Could you talk a little bit about some of the resources you have?
Yeah, so we have a lot of resources on our website on David's Law, and then David's Law 2.0, right? So we opened up David's Law in 21, and there's a lot of prevention tools that are now going to be required in our schools, and we're waiting on TEA to come out with the minimum rules for that in our schools. So there's a lot of information there from parents on using the civil, the education, and the criminal code, what it all means to parents. We also have a program called the Don't Bully Me Project, which is the DBM project for short. It's also my son David's initials, David Bartlett Molak. And I have worked with 4 legal aid providers across the state of Texas. And we provide pro bono legal services to parents to help make bullying stop. I'm very clear, we do not get involved in school issues. This is a program if a parent has gone to a school and the school is unable to make cyberbullying stop, they can reach out to our foundation and we can connect them with an attorney, and that attorney can use some civil side of David's Law in order to get an injunction, a restraining order against a cyberbully, and also brings in the parents of the cyberbullying, requiring the parents to make the child stop the behavior. What we found is like cease and desist letters work 98% of the time, and so the court system doesn't have to be used. Which is great. We don't want that.
Right.
Like I said earlier, the child that's the target in these situations, they just want to make it stop and to be able to go on and live a happy life.
Do you want to highlight the TEACS curriculum?
Yes. So in 2019, we passed some legislation. It was actually included in SB 11 in the school safety bill that schools teach digital citizenship and the criminal consequences of cyberbullying. There's also some bullying and cyberbullying requirements that were in other legislation. And so what we've done at David's Legacy is we've created lessons that meet each of the health TEACs for bullying and cyberbullying. And these are free to schools. They can sign up on our website. They get access to them. The school counselors or the health coaches can use them and teach those lessons. They can pick and choose on what they use. So we do that. We also go into the schools and we do presentations that actually are mandated now through the David's Law 2.0. We teach them about reporting, what bullying is, what it isn't, what we've been talking about today, how to get help. Why do we report? The importance of reporting, and it's some other things in there about relationships. And so we do that as well as many other things. So we've got a lot of resources on our website.
That's great.
We just want to help.
Absolutely. Maurine, thank you so much for joining me today in the Learning Lab studio and for sharing your experience and your expertise. And thank you for everything that you all are doing to end bullying and fighting against bullying. So thank you for that. To the listeners, thank you. I hope you leave here with a deeper understanding of bullying and how it impacts mental health and school safety. I wanted to note that on our next episode, we will explore the topic of substance use, specifically fentanyl. Thank you for joining us in our mission to prepare today for a safer tomorrow.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.